Welcome back, everybody. Take a look at this. Brand new, custom cut engine stand. This time made out of Douglas fir. I believe the old engine stand was probably made out of Douglas fir as well. Obviously, having some rot towards the front, we wanted to get that fixed, and what better way to fix it than just making all new wood? In theory, I could have probably reused it, but it doesn't teach anyone anything. So here's what we did. We took the original engine stand, as you saw. We duplicated all the cuts, the reliefs in the back. Those get kind of tricky. You'll have to get creative when you do your exhaust reliefs, and whatever you do, don't forget, I'm going to emphasize that a few times, don't forget to cut your reliefs for that. I've done one of these before and I did forget, and I went to go install it and I had already applied the polyester resin, gel coat, everything, and then I had to cut those reliefs out again, and boy was it a pain. So as you can see where the original engine mount was, and you can see where the new one is. And notice the one on the right is pitched out a little bit more to the right. That's done on purpose. If you remember where the engine stood on this side, it was directly in line. This one, it had been pitched over a little bit to the right, so what I did was moved the engine stand over. Otherwise, all the dimensions are the same. Used the same material, a 2x8 here, 2x8 here, and then we did a 10-degree cut at the bottom, and this was basically like a 2x4. It's a little bit longer. It's like 3 7/8 on both sides, and then I did a 10-degree cut. So you'll notice what's different on this engine stand compared to the other one is I actually have a 2x4 made out of Douglas fir on the opposite side. So what they had done, the original manufacturer, is rather than putting a 2x4 and capping it at the end, they just ran a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. If you think about it, you've got a possibly 800-pound motor sitting right here and on this side, and it's bouncing around, right? And you've got plenty of strength here on this vertical, and same thing holding this horizontal 2x8, but all you have in the back is a 3/4 inch piece of what was probably pine plywood. That's no good. So the obvious way to do this correctly is, if you're going to cap this thing off, put a 2x4 on this side. Now, some other things you could have done versus putting a piece of 3/4 inch plywood over here is you could have taken this 2x4 and ran it underneath this. It would give it added strength. It's just, I didn't want to leave this as a piece of plywood, so we added this 2x4. This is all going to get Kevlar'd over anyway, so it'll have plenty of waterproofing capabilities and strength as it is. But that's something that I added myself. And you'll notice all my fasteners are stainless steel screws. No steel in this. The original screws, actually they'd used nails, were all rusted, and that's no good. So I use stainless steel everything. There's no metal in here with ferrous in it, nothing, no zinc coated, none of that business. It's all stainless steel. Even on my prep boards, my template boards, I even use stainless steel. It's just a good practice when you're working around boats and rebuilding boats. Don't bring any kind of ferrous metal, any kind of anything that's not stainless. Don't bring it around the boat so you're not tempted to use it. It's kind of a good practice. Keep stainless steel everywhere you go, and you'll never go wrong. So what I've got here, I got it essentially bolted up to the bulkhead. And let's see real quick where we stand with our laser. You can see it is still spot on to where it was before on that side. Let's take a look over here. Pretty darn close, if not right on that side. Good. The other thing we talked about is we were trying to gauge where the engine mounts were. If you remember this board, this is kind of where it comes into play. We'll go ahead and get it in position. All right. Good. And we'll move over here and set that into place too. Good. And we'll just do a bird's eye view, looking straight down. Yep. And we'll catch that one just fine. And we will also catch this one just fine as well. So this is good. We'll talk about what we're going to do next in terms of making sure we have the right height. So you can see, based on the original measurements, we need to be just under 5 inches. It looks about 4 7/8. So that's about what we're going to look for in terms of getting the correct height on this. Let's take a look on this side to make sure it's the same. All right, kind of hard to see with the angle, but yeah, just about 4 7/8 too. The other important factor here is to make sure your engine stand is level. Everything else in the boat is also level left and right, so keep that in mind when you're putting your engine stand in. You want to have a good baseline, keep everything nice and level. So far everything looks good. I like how it's turned out. What I'm going to probably do now is work on developing the blocks that the motor actually sits on, and we'll see what we got out there. I've got some Douglas fir 4x4s, which are more or less going to be about 3.5 inches. So we'll need to work on figuring out the proper height here. What I'll also do as well, since we got the engine stand in, is I'm going to work on putting the stringers all the way to the back. We've got one that needs to go all the way back this way. We've got one that butts up to the engine mount over here. Same thing on the right side, and then that one. So realistically, we've got 4 stringers left, and that's it. And then we'll put the engine mounts, and we're going to start putting the decking on this. So we are coming right along. We're moving and progressing quite well. So let's go ahead now and finish cutting the 4x4s, and we'll figure out what we're going to use to get this to the proper height. All right, so I found the trick. If you take a Douglas fir 4x4 and a Douglas fir 2x4 together, they equal 4 7/8. Totally got lucky there, I'm telling you. It doesn't get better than that. Let's go take a look at the original engine mount and see how long they are. All right, so I took the liberty of measuring. This side is pretty well flush. We've got a few that kind of extend out pretty wide there. So I took the widest of the angle, the widest of the length, which is 9 inches. And I did the same thing over on that side as well. So these are going to be, we're gonna cut them at 9 versus putting in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slices of plywood in there. You can definitely tell that's what they did. Although it did kind of hold up there, it's super sloppy. Not very happy about that. I'd rather just go the route that I'm going, give it some good strength. Let's go back to the wood. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to mark this off. I'm going to cut both of these at 9, and we'll cut 2 of them, 1 for each side. All right. Got them all cut 9 inches long. Sanded all the edges. And got it installed. Let's take a look here. I'd say we are probably within maybe 1/8 of an inch in terms of this thing being perfect with these blocks. One thing to notice is you see how this is pitched over a little bit, but the hole is still dead on. This one is kind of flush with the edge, but the hole is still dead on. If this bothers you, what you could do technically is you could take this engine mount and kick it over some more, maybe roughly about 1.5 inches. Some reasons why you may want to not do that is because this is roughly in the center, and then this one would be, if you basically take this measurement to the outside edge, this side to the outside edge, they're both equal. So what you'd have to do is kind of throw off the balance of the boat a little bit to make this engine mount sit correctly. So what I'd rather do is just keep everything in the center. These are equal spaces apart, and then as a result of that engine that's in here, that 5 liter, it just happens, the mount happens to be kicked over a little bit more to the right. It doesn't really bother me at all. The mount will still hold just as fine. The original, I don't know if you remember way back, but the boat manufacturers didn't allow for that. So what they did was they actually had this right along the edge, and the engine mount was barely, if you remember, I think it was episode 1 or 2, maybe, or actually like 2 or 3. You'll see where the engine mount was barely catching on. I mean, it was like, I think, cocked over to one side just so they could get the mount on it. So what I knew that going in, so I kind of anticipated that, and we've got the engine mount actually centered up a lot better in this run. What you can do, is probably not a bad idea, is you actually turn this engine stand upside down and throw some screws in here, some stainless steel screws to hold this main block, and then throw a screw down this way and that way. And this is all encased in Kevlar or 1708 fiberglass in your situation, so it'll hold just fine. I believe the original one that I've got was held in by 3 or 4 nails, and it still did just fine. So what I'll probably do in my situation is we'll flip this around so the grain is facing horizontal. Same thing, we'll flip that around too, so when we go to nail it or screw it, we'll screw it in this way. And I guess at that point, you know what you can do, if you do happen to make a oopsie or you got to change something later on, try to put your screws towards the edge so you can take your oscillating saw if you need to and cut those bolts off or the screws off. So keep that in mind if you're doing this and you're not quite as sure like I am that these are in the right these blocks are in the right position, because if you have to change it later on, you're going to be in some trouble. So another thing that kind of helps build some confidence is, remember before when we had the original engine mounts, we took some laser measurements. You can do the same thing again with your laser level, and just as you got these blocks set in place, remember we took measurements there for like 7 and I believe that says 10 3/8. So you can do the same thing here. Measure to these dots to make sure that everything is sitting properly. Keep in mind too, it should be, yeah, looks good. Same thing there. That is, tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, that is spot on. Let's take a look at this side here. I haven't checked this out yet. See, this is the first look. I'd say maybe within, if it's not spot on, maybe like 1/8 of an inch off, something like that. Yeah, looks good. Yeah, and just to reemphasize, this is 2'9" where it was originally, where that laser aperture would be, right about there. That's where the original hole was. And we know, based on the way the design was, that was incorrect. So we moved it over. But otherwise, that is really nice. Now another option you could do too is you could toenail these into place. And what that means is you'll just take a screw from the top and drill it at a 45-degree angle into that. You get some good 3-inch stainless steel screws. You do it on a few different angles, you should be just fine. If you need, you can also get a hold of some stainless steel fasteners and basically run it along this edge, or some stainless steel 90s, and put some screws here, put some screws there, and the metal fastener will hold this in place. There's a few different options, and you can do that after you put Kevlar or fiberglass it. It's kind of up to you on how you want to handle that, but that in a nutshell is how you do it. Like I said, I've taken a lot of good measurements here, so I'm actually, in my situation, I'm going to flip this whole engine stand over. I'll mark where it is now first, and I'll actually permanently attach these with stainless steel screws from the bottom, and then afterwards I'll put some screws, probably one here, one there, and then I'll wait until I get the engine mount in place, and then I'll probably maybe put 2 more where the engine stand is. This way I don't run into drilling the lag bolts in for where the engine sits in the same spot where there's stainless steel screws. Don't want to have that same situation. But yeah, in terms of things like the engine reliefs, you're going to have to be a little meticulous when it comes to cutting those out. Like I said, you're going to have those. You can see I've used my 1x2 piece of pine. That helped out a lot in trying to find where the new engine mount is supposed to go. You want to use this laser device, which also measures length. If you've got it, helps keep things straight. You want to have your level in place. Your boat needs to be level overall. Consider some of the tips that I've got when doing your own project, because this is kind of considered possibly maybe one of the most critical parts, because you're going to have your flooring in, you're going to have all this covered with brand new decking and everything, and if this motor doesn't sit in or the engine blocks need to be moved over, it's going to be kind of a bummer. You know, you're going to not, in some ways you're not going to necessarily have to start over, but it's kind of a pain having to start and cut into this and get wood and fiberglass or epoxy all over the place as you're trying to demo these blocks out again to get them straight. So take your time when you're doing this. If you've got any questions or concerns, leave some comments in the fields below. Let me know what you're wondering. I can give you some tips. This is not my first rodeo putting one of these OMC or Volvo Pentas in, so I'll be glad to help if you have anything. As always, like the video if you thought it was helpful. Subscribe if you're not already a member, and catch me up on the next episode as we put the stringers in place. Have a good one.